History often prefers the comfort of a lie to the discomfort of a complex truth. In 1917, there was no image more wholesome, more universally trusted than a glass of fresh, creamy milk. It was the very essence of health, the perfect food endorsed by doctors, government officials, and mothers across America. It was the white gold of the agricultural economy, a symbol of pastoral purity that sat on millions of breakfast tables every morning. But in the dusty archives of the United States Department of Agriculture, buried beneath stacks of routine reports and bureaucratic indifference, a terrifying reality was waiting to be uncovered. While the nation drank its fill, a silent killer was slipping into homes, schools, and hospitals, camouflaged in that very symbol of vitality. History often prefers the comfort of a lie to the discomfort of a complex truth. In 1917, there was no image more wholesome, more universally trusted than a glass of fresh, creamy milk. It was the very essence of health, the perfect food endorsed by doctors, government officials, and mothers across America. It was the white gold of the agricultural economy, a symbol of pastoral purity that sat on millions of breakfast tables every morning. But in the dusty archives of the United States Department of Agriculture, buried beneath stacks of routine reports and bureaucratic indifference, a terrifying reality was waiting to be uncovered. While the nation drank its fill, a silent killer was slipping into homes, schools, and hospitals, camouflaged in that very symbol of vitality. The year was 1917, and a mysterious ailment known as undulant fever was ghosting through the population. Physicians were baffled. The symptoms, recurring fevers, crippling joint pain, and profound exhaustion, mimicked other diseases, making it a phantom plague that defied easy diagnosis.
It was into this medical fog that Alice Catherine Evans stepped. She was a rarity in the scientific world of the early 20th century, a woman without a PhD, working in the labyrinthine halls of the USDA's Bureau of Animal Industry. To her male colleagues, she was a diligent worker, perhaps suited for the tedious tasks of cataloging and observation, but certainly not a visionary capable of overturning established dogma. They could not have been more wrong. Alice was assigned to study Bacillus abortus, a bacterium known to cause miscarriages in cattle. It was an agricultural problem, a financial nuisance for farmers, but considered harmless to humans, or so the scientific consensus insisted. But as Alice peered through her brass microscope, adjusting the focus on the slides that held the secrets of the dairy industry, she noticed something unsettling. The bacterium from the sick cows looked hauntingly familiar. It bore a striking, almost identical resemblance to another microbe, Micrococcus melitensis.
This was no harmless bug. It was the deadly agent responsible for Malta fever, a scourge that had decimated human populations in the Mediterranean. The conventional wisdom of the time, written in the heavy, leather-bound textbooks of the era, stated that these two bacteria were distinct, unrelated entities. One affected cows, the other affected humans. There was a rigid wall between the species, a biological barrier that nature supposedly respected. But Alice Evans, working in the solitude of her lab, surrounded by petri dishes and the faint smell of agar, began to dismantle this wall brick by brick. She ran tests that no one else had thought to run. She questioned assumptions that no one else dared to question. And the answer she found was chilling. The bacteria were not cousins. They were practically twins. Alice realized that the agricultural nuisance affecting cows was capable of jumping the species barrier. The ramifications were catastrophic. If she was right, Bacillus abortus wasn't just killing calves, it was infecting humans who drank raw milk.
The perfect food was, in reality, a biological delivery system for a debilitating disease. Every unpasteurized bottle delivered to a doorstep was a potential grenade. Alice sat back in her chair, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. She held in her hands the proof that the dairy industry was unwittingly poisoning the nation's children. But as she prepared her report, she had no idea that the bacteria would be the least of her enemies. She was about to declare war on an entire industry, and the weapon they would use against her was silence.
In 1918, Alice Catherine Evans stood before the Society of American Bacteriologists to present her findings. She was 37 years old, a civil servant in a modest dress, standing before a phalanx of distinguished men in tailored suits. She laid out her data with meticulous precision. She showed the undeniable link between the bacteria in the milk and the fever in the hospitals. She proposed a solution that was simple, effective, and scientifically sound: mandatory pasteurization. Heating the milk would kill the bacteria and save lives. She expected debate. She expected skepticism. What she received was a wall of condescending dismissal that bordered on erasure. The backlash was immediate and visceral. It didn't matter that her methodology was flawless. What mattered was who she was, and more importantly, who she wasn't. She was not a man. She was not a PhD holder from an Ivy League university. She was a government researcher telling the titans of science that they had missed something obvious. Dr.
Theobald Smith, a giant in the field of bacteriology, dismissed her work as bacteriological nonsense. His voice carried weight, and his rejection served as a permission slip for the rest of the scientific community to ignore her. They didn't just disagree with her, they patronized her. The idea that raw milk, the lifeblood of the American diet, could be dangerous was treated as hysterical fantasy. But the opposition wasn't just academic, it was deeply economic. The dairy industry was a juggernaut, a multi-million-dollar empire built on the image of fresh, raw milk. Pasteurization cost money. It required equipment, time, and fuel. It cut into margins. Moreover, the industry argued that pasteurization would ruin the flavor and nutritional value of the milk. To admit that raw milk was dangerous would be to admit liability for thousands of illnesses. So they launched a campaign of denial. They funded their own studies, cherry-picked data, and utilized their influence in Washington to ensure that Alice's warnings died in committee rooms.
They painted her as an alarmist, a woman out of her depth, trying to scare the public for attention. The tragedy of Alice Evans is not just in the rejection of her work, but in the physical toll it took on her. In a cruel twist of irony, the very monster she was trying to slay turned its claws on her. In 1922, while continuing her research, Alice became infected with brucella, the pathogen she had identified. The disease ravaged her body. For the next 20 years, she would suffer from chronic, debilitating fevers and joint pain that often left her bedridden for months at a time. Yet, even from her sickbed, in the grip of the very agony she wanted to spare others, she refused to surrender. She wrote papers from her hospital room. She answered letters from the few open-minded doctors who were seeing what she had predicted. She became a ghost in the machine of the scientific establishment, a persistent, unwanted voice that would not be silenced by illness or ridicule. While the men in power attended banquets and toasted to the health of the nation with glasses of raw milk, Alice lay in the dark, her body burning with fever, knowing that with every passing day, more people were falling ill. The conspiracy of silence was strong, fortified by greed and ego, but it had underestimated the endurance of the woman it tried to crush. She was playing a long game, one where the currency was not money, but the undeniable, stubborn persistence of truth. The Evans controversy, as it came to be known, raged for 2 agonizing decades. It was a war of attrition fought in the pages of medical journals and the corridors of public health departments. For 20 years, the dairy industry held the line, supported by a scientific establishment that refused to apologize. But truth, unlike people, cannot be intimidated, it cannot be bribed, and it cannot be shamed into silence. Slowly, painfully, the cracks in the wall began to appear.
The cases of undulant fever continued to mount, affecting not just the poor, but the wealthy and the connected. The illness could no longer be dismissed as a rare anomaly. Independent researchers, initially skeptical, began to replicate Alice's experiments. One by one, in labs across Europe and America, scientists peered into their microscopes and saw exactly what Alice had seen in 1917.
They found the deadly link between the cow and the human, the bottle and the bedside. The undeniable reality of brucellosis, the name finally given to the disease, forced the hands of the skeptics. The most damning evidence came from the very people who had mocked her. As their own families and communities fell ill, the theoretical became personal. The cost of their arrogance was measured in human suffering, a bill that had been accumulating interest for 20 years. By the late 1930s, the tide had turned irrevocably. The weight of the evidence was crushing. Public health officials, finally armed with corroborating studies from male scientists that validated Alice's original work, began to mandate pasteurization. The dairy industry, facing a PR nightmare and potential lawsuits, capitulated. The equipment they claimed was too expensive was suddenly installed in processing plants nationwide.
The practice of pasteurization transformed from a controversial theory into a standard safety measure, a silent guardian in every refrigerator. Alice's vindication was absolute, though it came decades too late to save her health. In 1928, in a profound shift of the tectonic plates of history, the Society of American Bacteriologists, the same organization that had once let her stand alone in a room full of doubting men, elected her as their first female president. It was a quiet victory, devoid of ticker-tape parades, but it was a monumental acknowledgement of her resilience. She had dragged the scientific world, kicking and screaming, into the light. Alice Catherine Evans lived to be 94 years old, surviving the disease that plagued her for half her life. Today, when you reach for a carton of milk at the grocery store, you likely don't think of her. You don't think of the fever, the mockery, or the lonely years of struggle. You simply trust that it is safe. That safety is her legacy. It is a monument built not of stone, but of lives saved. Millions of breakfasts eaten without fear. Millions of children who grew up strong because one woman, disregarded and silenced, refused to let the world drink poison. Her name may not be on the bottle, but her victory is inside every drop. She found the poison, she fought the giants, and in the end, she forced history to rewrite itself.